Welcome back. Federal government leaders have described data as the fuel that will propel AI. Financial management practitioners all across the government are finding new ways to use AI to drive mission and to manage agency budgets better. Vinay Singh is Chief Financial Officer at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Joe Baptiste is Senior Manager at EY. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Vinay, you said before we went on the air something I thought was really interesting. You said AI to you is fully just a change management issue. How so, and what does that mean for the way that you and your colleagues approach AI at HUD?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I view it as change management because technology continues to evolve. We're always doing a new system, a new upgrade, implementation. But really now, because of the force of AI, every stakeholder in our organization, in every organization, is involved, will be impacted. So it's a change management. I've done change management in projects all my career, and this is a significant one because we have to get it right. We don't want it to get shut down. There's a lot of guidance. And so this is essentially a communication exercise of talking to leadership, OGC, CIO. Wall Street Journal had a great article a month ago about the issue at organizations with AI is where's it going to be? Mm-hmm. And I'm not advocating that it be in CFO. It is not. We'll get to that later. But it is a massive change management.
If it's not in CFO, then that it means really collaboration is maybe one of the most important issues here, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the OCFO, as we know it in the federal government, cuts across, especially at HUD, we're decentralized. So we work with all the program offices as well as the support offices. And so we already have kind of the mechanics of how to govern, whether it be strategic goals that we involve our program partners, et cetera. So yes, collaboration is critical. We have one of our leaders in policy, data, and research, Solomon Green, has a monthly listening session. He started it months ago around AI and future technologies. And right now it is just that, as a listening session. And we are, we'll get into what we're doing. But at CFO, I really see this as educating folks.
I do want to get into what you're doing specifically with use cases later in the conversation. Joe, welcome. Thanks for coming on today. What are you seeing as you look across the landscape, not just at HUD, but all the agencies that you work with? Are most agencies still in that listening session phase, or are they moving on to use cases, as we heard earlier in the program? Or I guess the answer, as I've said several times on this show, is it depends, right?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I mean, as you look at the landscape of our civilian agencies, right? We heard from the VA, we heard from DHS earlier. They're being very progressive with some of the new technologies. And they're weaving in automation and AI together. And I think that's one of the things that's been making them successful in terms of how do you actually apply it? What we're seeing with most of the agencies right now is, yes, they're in listening mode, they're in learning mode, they're also in adapting mode. And so they're adapting to the new technologies, they're learning how to use them, they're kind of sharing those insights with their peers. And so when you have somebody who's used a technology before and then they're like, hey, this is actually really cool, and then you go use it, right? Actually having those hands-on experiences are making a big difference. So, as Vinay talked about the change management experience, that all leads to the same end goal, right? Of you're listening, you're learning, and then you're applying it down the line.
You wrote recently about 3 points, 3 themes that you're seeing across the government. The first one's reimagining the enterprise. Are agencies taking this opportunity finally to rethink their business systems in before they apply the AI tools? Is that what you're getting at?
Absolutely.
That's great.
When we realize, we look at the enterprise today, and we look at the enterprise in several years from now, it's going to continue to evolve based on the technologies, and they're a lot easier to use, right? And so several years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, we started to see RPA come on the scene. And everybody is like, oh, the RPA, this is really cool. But that was only the hands, right? There were the eyes, the ears, the mouth, all of those virtual things that were still being applied from an AI perspective, the natural language processing, the OCR. Those things were still actually technologies that weren't being applied then, 6, 7 years ago. But now you started to see over the years skills being embedded within, the traditional RPA bots, things being woven in within the AWS and the Azure stacks that, weren't available several years ago. So seeing a lot of that as we reimagine how we use technology and how we reimagine how we do processes, right? I'm an accountant in my early stages that turned technologist. So when I think about using AI and automation to do reconciliations, which our government, which is Vinay's teams are doing all the time, or governments are doing all the time. big data, moving data from one system to the next. Like those things can be done seamlessly now, where before you had to have somebody actually running the buttons and pushing the buttons.
You were really nodding enthusiastically, Vinay, when he talked about reimagining the enterprise. What's the importance of that? And is this kind of a seminal opportunity for you and other agencies, I guess, across government to really rethink the way that they do business and not just apply this new technology to current stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm also a process guy, so accountant, now technologist as well, but process is where it all starts, right? And governments, for decades, many of them bring in consultants, they write up a process, they do a review, it sits on a shelf. This is time where you can actually utilize this energy and capitalize on this energy. The programs are very excited, right? So like, use this enthusiasm to fix some of the processes. We're not going to do them all. We can't boil the ocean. But again, I'm focused on the operational impacts. And there's critical housing policy issues that need to be addressed. But again, that's kind of a separate piece that we will learn together, I think, on that.
So to your point about this being a change management issue, how do you develop enthusiasm then among people who may not, I mean, in every change management situation, you have some folks that are not really big fans of the idea. How do you bring folks like that along, or do you just have to recognize that there are going to be some folks that are going to maybe be left behind?
Well, you definitely have to go in knowing that you're not going to win everyone over, but you've got to go in. My style is always actually just have a discussion, right? And so I think one of the critical partners here, obviously, is the Chief Information Officer. Ours is Beth Nieblock, and so she and I have been tied at the hip talking about this. And in fact, I've been advocating for the CIO Council and the CFO Council to actually create a joint working group. Again, because there's just so much that CFO and CIO can do to build the fundamentals and then let the rest of the agency kind of jump in where they need to.
What are those things that the CFO and CIO can do together to build those building blocks?
The first thing is create a sandbox, right? So everyone is concerned about privacy, security, as they should be. So what we want to demonstrate with these small wins and this whole change management exercise is that we'll create a sandbox. We will only put in, let's say, public data that's already there, and play around with it to see if we can get the efficiencies and optimization of what we're doing.
How do you build a construct around that so that it isn't just experimentation, so that it's something that can form eventually something that you can scale?
Yeah, and that's what I talked to our assistant CFO, Kate Darling, who runs our AI CFO working group, in building out an actual structure, right? So this governance, a steering committee, but then when we take in, so the intake of these use cases is also important to figure out what is the criteria we're going to set that this is a success. Therefore, it will be moved. It will get clearance from kind of a leadership perspective. Everyone votes on it, almost like an IT, piece that we review projects, and then it moves forward. We just have to be very vigilant. We've got to be very involved. I mean, I'm very hands-on this because what my biggest fear is, there's so much legislation around this, but my biggest fear is that we just shut this thing down, because I see this as leapfrogging technologies, okay? So being in government, that we're often micromanaged, or technologies, budgets take a long time to develop, and implementations are 18 months, 36 months, a lot of failures. This can leapfrog some of the low-hanging fruit. And we can actually just move on and get our people excited to do value-added work, not the grunt, kind of transactional piece. It's what's at the end of that? What are those insights? And then what can we do with that? So, I always address my team when people are concerned about workforce. And I said, this is not you're not going to lose jobs around this, at least for 20, 30 years. There's a great example given around operators when the telephone came about and everyone was concerned that operators are going to lose their job. It took 30 years before that happened. And everyone uses AI now. So it's a generational shift. It'll evolve. Sorry.
Joe, no, not at all. Because, Joe, I wanted to follow into that with another point that you made about building confidence in AI strategy. And it sounds like the steps that Vinay is taking is exactly in line with what you're writing about building that confidence. Absolutely. So that then a user or the person who's being served by that user understands what they've gotten and how they've gotten it. Is that a fair read?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things, especially when we're dealing with, let's say CFO processes, right? If we have an AI-powered automation do something today that's going to be reported on, we're going to have to talk to auditors. They're going to have to be able to say, "Hey, how did you get that?" And when I first started doing audit work, one of the responses that came from the government years ago was, I don't know, the system just populates it. Well, now we have to say, okay, well, we've built this AI system, this AI solution to help solve your problem, Vinay. This is exactly how it works. This is exactly the parameters. This is the data that goes in. This is the data that comes out. So when an auditor comes walking at the door, you got to be able to explain it. And the strategy around that starts with, the data. How do you get it? How do you use it? How do you display it? And then, what happens to it when it's no longer in use? And so those things, you have to really be very diligent about. You have to be very strategic in terms of application. Vinay talked about finding the right process, finding the right use case to apply. And then you asked, how do you sustain those things? Well, when you take these projects and you start small and you start to, what we found is when you explain them well enough and they work great, it's a natural transition into deployment.
How transparent does a bot have to be when the auditor comes to call? Because we've talked about transparency a lot on this program, but I imagine the answer a bot gave me that is not sufficient to suit the auditor.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, when any automations, right? When I say bots, it could be RPA, it could be a virtual agent, which is a chat bot. It could be something back end that you don't even see in what we call, so these bots. When we create automations, we actually are very detailed in terms of exact steps. So when you think about a process map, you think about a 3-level process map. Well, automations really need to go down to the 5th level, the keystrokes, right? What are you looking at when you're looking at this Excel file? What is the AI going to interpret when it looks at this data? And how is it interpreting it? Is it interpreting it based on bias, right? So then we got to be truthful. How do we make the truth come out of it? And so, EY as an audit firm historically, right? From my experience, being able to show and document everything, and so everything starts with documentation. Most of the work that we do as technologists at EY is a lot of documentation, and then we spend, we have agile development cycles, but then we go back to the documentation to make sure it says what it said, what the AI is doing. So. It is very critical to be able to solve and answer those questions to GAO, to the auditors, to anybody who comes asking.
You talked about change management. At the beginning of this is how we framed it, Vinay, coming out of the box. What does that look like from a cultural perspective? What do you have to do? What would your peers have to do to be successful from a cultural perspective in an AI landscape?
It's change management to me is all about communication. So it's what is the script for various audiences. So this Thursday, RIG, Ray Oliver Davis, and I are speaking on AI at a panel. So it's even just kind of reaching out and saying, hey, we need to talk about this. I know you've got views, and sitting down and understanding what those different audiences need and creating that script.
Is there a way to measure success in either using AI broadly from a strategic perspective across the agency or from the individual projects? Like, what are the markers that you say, this is working the way that we would like it to work, or we need to rethink and redirect?
It's essentially, first of all, are we saving people's time? Right, it's number one is that's an easy ROI to just say we've gone from 1 year of doing an audit or a cycle to a day and a half, right? And then the real next level is what is that enabled that person to do? What extra insights are they bringing to the table? What's the new work? And so those are maybe soft or qualitative, but you have to track those.
Yeah, and do you track those in what way, I guess, is the way to ask the question. In what way do you track those?
So I do it, so first we're incubating a lot of this, so this is not all taken off. But the way I do it is when I talk to my leadership team around, do you have enough people? Are you able to get all the projects that you're trying to do? Can you get them done? And so it's around succession planning. Do we need to hire more? We're always going to need to hire more, but are they freeing up time? And so I will see when they say, these are the 10 things I'm going to work on this year, and all of a sudden those 10 things change because they solved 3 of them already. I'll see that change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe, the third item on your list that we talked about earlier is augmenting human experience. That idea of augmenting human experience maybe is the source of a lot of the fear that people see in organizations like Vinay's, because they think we're going to apply these tools and he's not going to need me anymore. And you addressed that a few moments ago. What do you see as the best techniques that organizations can use to demonstrate that to folks and not just provide that acceleration, that accentuation, but to also communicate that to people so that they understand what they're getting?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's probably one of the funnest parts of my job, right? Like getting to, I would say, tinker, create these use cases, share the results with the community, and show them that the technology is not something to be feared upon. Especially, when you're looking at the FM community broadly, right? They're not technologists; they are process people. So when you tell them that a technology is going to come and wipe away their process or support them, augment them, they think that it's going to take their job. But essentially, if somebody could come in every day and have their 5 processes that they have queued up and they have an orchestrator, let's say, for lack of a better term, that they could go press play, that would empower them to want to do more things. And so, when we look at augmenting the workforce, it's not about taking their jobs. It's about, like Vinay said earlier, letting them do things faster. If we have 15 people that all are doing the same thing, processing the same thing, let's say processing invoices or documents, why not have AI be able to do that? Why not have AI be able to use optical character recognition and pull that information out and put it into the financial system? We're losing the ability to keep up. And so augmenting is not necessarily augmenting. It's providing a virtual workforce that can help support, the physical.
Vinay, this question's maybe more philosophical than tactical, but what does the FM community have to offer the broader conversation about AI in government that's a different perspective than maybe acquisition and human capital and technology are not thinking about or are not thinking about on as forefront a level as the FM community is?
So, just being very... getting to the nuts and bolts of what Melijo, our CFO financial management, I talk about, they're huge, have already leaned into RPA, right, the robotics piece. And so the teams are already thinking on how to use this information. But they produce the agency financial report, which is one of the most, and it's very difficult to do, but there's so much information in there. And I would love to, at our fingertips, be able to get the insights from that. So just even doing the management discussion analysis piece, if you have a virtual assistant that can answer my questions instead of me trying to convene a meeting, get to the bottom of what does this mean? How do we spend money? How can we do it better? There's so much there. And then from the audit perspective as well, the compliance piece, that's why I'm talking to the IG, because I really want us to build this together to figure out how we're going to do this right. I think FM has enormous space here.
Vinay, Joe, it's a great conversation. Thank you both very much for joining me today.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You can read more about AI and financial management at fedgovtoday.com. As you've probably learned from this program, the AI landscape in government is already filled with projects and potential. FedGov Today will keep you up to date on FedGov Today TV, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on ABC7 in Washington and on our YouTube channel, on the FedGov Today podcast every Tuesday and Thursday, wherever you get your shows, and always on demand at fedgovtoday.com. My thanks to our guests from DHS, VA, and HUD, and our sponsors from AWS, Palo Alto Networks, and EY. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for watching.